Before we get into today's game, I want to talk about the sponsors for my channel. Card Conduit is the best way to sell your unused Magic cards. Whether you've got a box of unsorted bulk, or a complete and alphabetized set, there's a great option for everyone. With a payout averaging 19% better than using any one buy list, and that's after fees are applied, you can rest assured you'll get the best bang for your buck. And if you use the affiliate link in the description below, or the promo code MTGMuddstah, you'll save 10% off their fees. And 401 Games, Canada's one-stop shop for trading cards, board games, and hobby supplies. And if you use the promo code MTGMuddstah, your first purchase of MTG sealed and singles will be 5% off. Known for their awesome sleeves and deck boxes, did you know that Dragon Shield also has an app? It's true, they've got MTG Card Manager. Using your phone, you can scan your collection in any language, and get real-time information on the language and price of the card. You can find MTG Card Manager out now in any applicable app store. Today's patron shoutout goes to Amy. Thank you, Amy, for your continued support through Patreon. Hey gang, and welcome back. Today's game features more of those wonderful Canadian content creators, with Proxy playing his Stella Lee deck. He keeps 2 Islands, Lock and Load, Mountain, Exotic Orchard, Preordain, and Niv Mizzet Payroon. Neo Royale is playing his Zirda deck, keeping an Enlightened Tutor, Ancient Den, Thematic Compass, Chaos Wand, Avened Mind Sensor, Cavalier of Flame, and Boros Garrison. My buddy Chris the Commander Mechanic is playing his Mindskinner deck, keeping Spectral Sailor, Nerd Rage, Throne of Eldraine, Hand of Vecna, and 3 Islands. Mr. B, aka Mr. Bivers, is playing his Queen Marchesa, Long May She Reign, and he's got a Bloodforged Battle Axe, Blade Historian, Castle Ardenvale, Blood Crypt, 2 Plains, and Sir Gwyn, Hero of Ashvale. Proxy wins the die roll and starts us off. He just draws, plays an island, and passes. Neo has an Ancient Den for turn, and passes. Chris draws, plays an island, and passes. Mr. B draws, plays a Blood Crypt tapped, and passes. Proxy's turn has him playing an Exotic Orchard for turn, and he casts Think Twice, drawing another card. After that, he passes, with Neo casting Enlightened Tutor during his end step. He goes to find a Soul Ring, and puts it on top. Neo draws the Soul Ring, and plays it in his main phase, and then plays a Boros Garrison, and bounces his Ancient Den back to hand. He then follows up with a Thematic Compass, and passes. During his end step, Chris the Commander Mechanic flashes in Spectral Sailor. Chris draws and plays an island. He then casts Jace's Phantasm, and passes. Mr. B's got a Clifftop Retreat for turn, and he then plays a Wintermoor Commander. He ships it after that. Proxy's got a Mountain for turn, and then casts a Third Path Iconoclast, and passes after that. Neo's got a Plains, and he's got enough now to cast Zirda. He uses the floating colorless mana to help activate his Thematic Compass now that Zirda's reduced the cost, and he goes to find a basic, and passes while searching. Chris the Commander Mechanic plays an island, and he's then able to cast his commander, the Mindskinner. Proxy responds with an Opt, which gets him a soldier token from the Iconoclast, but after scrying and drawing 1, the Mindskinner then resolves. Going to combat, the Commander Mechanic swings his 2 flyers at Proxy, and they connect, but the damage is prevented. This then has everyone mill 2 cards, and after that, Chris passes. Mr. B draws for turn, and plays a Plains. He then casts a Bloodforged Battle Axe. Once it's out, he equips it onto the Wintermoor Commander, and he goes to combat. He swings the commander at Commander Mechanic, deals 4, and he takes 4. He swings the commander at Commander Mechanic, who takes 4. This has Mr. Bevers making another Battle Axe, and he passes to Proxy after that. Proxy draws and continues to manipulate the top of his deck, casting a Preordain, and scrying 2, and then drawing. He then plays an Izzet Boilerworks, bouncing Exotic Orchard back to hand, and follows up with a Young Pyromancer. Going to combat, he swings the Iconoclast at Chris for 2, who takes the hit, and he passes after that. Neo draws and plays an Ancient Den. He then casts Chaos Wand, and passes. Chris draws for turn, and plays an island, which shouldn't be a surprise to anyone since it's mono blue. He then swings the Mindskinner at Proxy, who, because it can't be blocked, has to take the 10, and it's prevented, and all of Chris's opponents mill 10. With nothing else, he passes. Mr. B draws and plays a Castle Ardenvale. He then casts Queen Marchesa, Long May She Reign. He becomes the Monarch, and then goes to combat. He swings the Commander with the Battle Axe at Neo Royale, dealing 4, and makes another Battle Axe. He then moves to his end step, drawing from being the Monarch. Proxy draws and plays an island. He then casts Stella Lee, and passes. During his end step, Neo once more activates the Thematic Compass, going to find a basic, and then targets Proxy as he activates the Chaos Wand. The wand hits Dig Through Time, which Neo then resolves, keeping his best 2 of his top 7 before moving to his turn. Neo draws, plays a Plains, and casts Oketra the True. He then passes, and during his end step, the Commander Mechanic uses his Spectral Sailor to draw a card. Chris the Commander Mechanic draws, and plays Proph's Eidetic Memory. He gets to draw a card as it enters, and he then plays an island for turn, and follows up by casting Nerd Rage onto his commander. He draws 2 as it enters. He then goes to combat. He announces he'll swing the Mindskinner at Proxy, and since it can't be blocked, Proxy takes the hit, which is prevented, and everyone then mills 13 this time. With nothing else, Chris passes. Mr. B draws and plays a Plains. He then casts Vanquisher's Banner, naming Knight. Going to combat, he swings Queen Marchesa at Chris the Commander Mechanic, and the Wintermoor Commander at Neo. Neither of them block, and they each take their damage, with Mr. B getting another axe, and then passes after that. Proxy's turn has him drawing and playing a Temple of the False God. He then casts Octavia and goes to combat. He swings a single soldier token at Mr. Beavers, trying to take the Monarchy. Mr. B doesn't block, taking the 1, and Proxy becomes the Monarch. He then moves to his end step and draws a card from it, while once more Neo Royale activates his Chaos Wand and targets him with it. This time around he hits a Rousing Refrain, which he casts and suspends under his control. Neo's turn has him drawing and playing a mountain, and he continues with his wands, casting a Wand of Wonder. He then leaves up enough mana and his activated abilities as he passes the turn to Chris. Chris draws and plays an island. He then casts Throne of Eldraine, naming blue. Going to combat, he swings the Mindskinner at Mr. B, and since again it can't get blocked, it deals the damage which is prevented and mills all of his opponents for 13 instead. With nothing else, he passes. Mr. B makes an Assassin on his upkeep because he's not the Monarch, and then draws for turn. He plays a Fabled Passage and sacrifices it, going to find a swamp. Once that's out, he casts Sir Gwen. He gets to draw a card from the Vanquisher's Banner, and he then moves all of his battle axes onto the Wintermoor Commander. Going to combat, he swings the Commander at Chris the Commander Mechanic, who blocks with a Spectral Sailor. Mr. B also gets to draw a card and lose 1 from Sir Gwen's trigger from attacking, and he passes after that. Proxy draws and plays a Sol Ring in his main phase, and then pays a red and a blue for Expressive Iteration. This has him exiling a Smoldering Stagecoach off Stella Lee, and he gets to make one of his soldier tokens into an 8/8 because of Octavia. He then casts a Radical Idea, and makes his other soldier an 8/8 as well, and then follows up with a Gutter Snipe. Proxy then continues by flashing back Deep Analysis, making his Young Pyromancer an 8/8 as well, and dealing 2 to each of his opponents, plus making more tokens. Going to combat, Proxy swings an 8/8 at everyone, and Neo activates Oketra in response. Chris the Commander Mechanic also casts Keep Watch, drawing 3. And moving to blocks, Neo chumps with his new token, Mr. B trades with an Assassin, and Chris just takes the 8. With nothing else, Proxy passes. Neo's turn has him drawing and activating Thematic Compass for a mountain, which he then plays for turn. He casts a Cavalier of Flames, discarding 4 to draw 4. And he then casts an Arcane Signet and passes. Chris the Commander Mechanic draws and activates Throne of Eldraine, drawing 2. He then plays a Hand of Vecna and pays 10 life to equip it onto the Mindskinner. When he then moves to combat, Neo activates the Wand of Wonder and luckily hits a Reality Shift, D-Spark, and Curse of Swine. Neo rolls a Nat 20 and he's able to use Reality Shift on the Mindskinner and D-Spark on Sir Gwyn, while the Curse of the Swine does nothing, so he leaves in exile. Having just paid a boatload of life to effectively do nothing, Chris then moves to a second main phase and plays an island and then casts a Silent Gravestone. Mr. B makes an assassin token on his upkeep, draws, and plays a Vault of the Archangel as his land for turn. He then casts an Inspiring Veteran, and he goes to combat. He swings the Wintermoor Commander at proxy, who blocks with a Soldier token, and Mr. B then passes. Proxy draws and plays a Cascade Bluffs, and then casts Pongify to destroy Zirda. He does his damage with the Gutter Snipe, makes one of his soldiers an 8/8, plus makes an Elemental token and another Soldier token as well. Proxy then continues by casting a Thunderclap Drake, which has Stella Lee Excellent and Arcane Bombardment off the top. Proxy then casts a Smoldering Stagecoach from exile, and he follows it up with a Lock and Load, drawing 2. Going to combat, Proxy sends Octavia at Neo Royale, 2 of his now 8/8 tokens at Mr. B, and 3 1/1 Elemental tokens at Chris. Neo chumps with a Soldier token, Chris blocks 2 of the tokens, and Mr. B trades with Marchesa and an Assassin. With nothing else, Proxy passes. Neo's turn has him casting an Inspiring Refrain on his upkeep, adding 8 red, and he then draws for turn. He then casts a Scroll Rack and activates it, and then recasts Zirda. He follows up by casting Divine Visitation, and then activates Oketra to make an Angel token, as the Visitation replaces the Soldier with an Angel. Going to combat, Neo activates the Cavalier to give his team haste, and then swings the 3/3 Ape at Mr. B, and 2 soldiers and an Angel at Proxy. Proxy crews up the Smoldering Stagecoach and blocks a Soldier token, while Mr. B declares no blocks. They then both take some damage, and Neo then transforms his Compass and passes. Chris the Commander Mechanic draws and plays an island. He then casts a Spectral Deluge. Neo responds by activating the Wand of Wonder, and he hits Slip Out the Back, Dawn's Truce, and Mizzix's Mastery. Neo rolls a 19, and he's able to cast Slip Out the Back on the Cavalier of Flame, but nothing else. The board then gets bounced. Chris the Commander Mechanic then casts Body of Knowledge, and he goes to combat. He swings his Manifest at Proxy for 2, and he steals the Monarch, and then moves to his end step, drawing a card and passing. Mr. B draws and plays a Plains for turn, and then recasts the Wintermoor Commander. He follows it up with an Embereth Skyblazer, and then recasts the Inspiring Veteran again, and passes. Proxy draws and plays a Mountain, and he casts a Niv Mizzet Peyrune in his main phase. He then recasts the Thunderclap Drake, and passes. Neo phases in his Cavalier, and then draws for turn. He recasts Zirda, and then plays Oketra, and activates her again, making an Angel token because of the replacement effect of the Divine Visitation. Neo Royale activates the Cavalier, giving his team haste again, and he then moves to combat. He swings the Cavalier at the Commander Mechanic, Oketra at Mr. B, and 2 Angel tokens go at Proxy. Proxy chumps 1 with the Thunderclap Drake, Mr. B takes 8, and Chris chumps with his Jace's Phantasm. With nothing else, Neo passes. Chris the Commander Mechanic draws and plays an island, and he recasts the Mindskinner. He then equips the Hand of Vecna onto the Body of Knowledge, and he moves to combat. He swings the Body of Knowledge at Proxy, who crews up his Smoldering Stagecoach to block it. To prevent Commander Mechanic from drawing a bunch though, Neo activates Spire of Araska, and targets the Body of Knowledge to remove it from combat. Chris then draws from being the Monarch during his end step, and passes turn. Mr. B draws and plays a Plains. He then casts a Blade Historian. Going to combat, he swings the Wintermoor Commander and Inspiring Veteran at Proxy, while the Embereth Skyblazer goes at Neo Royale. They all get double strike from attacking, and Neo blocks with an Angel token. Before damage, Mr. B activates the Vault of the Archangel, giving his team Death Touch and Lifelink, which coupled with double strike is pretty sweet. This has Proxy taking a total of 14, and Mr. B gains a total of 20 life, and with nothing else, he passes. Proxy draws and deals 1 to Mr. Bevers with Niv Mizzet's trigger. He then casts a Cursed Mirror as a copy of the Mindskinner, and then recasts Octavia. He then follows it up by flashing back Galvanic Iteration, making Niv Mizzet an 8/8 because of Octavia. Proxy deals another 1 to Mr. B with Niv, and then flashes back Think twice, and gets to copy it. Before moving to combat, Proxy taps Octavia to crew up the smoldering stagecoach, and then swings everything he can at Chris. Since he also controls a copy of the Mindskinner, the damage is prevented, and all of his opponents are forced to mill 37 cards. This mills out Neo Royale completely, and Mr. Bevers. With nothing else, Proxy passes. Neo's upkeep has him activating the scroll rack to put a card on top and prevent decking, and then draws for turn. He then casts a Shared Animosity, and activates Oketra 3 times, and once he's made 3 angel tokens, activates the Cavalier to give everything +1/+0 in haste. Going to combat, Neo swings Zirda and Oketra at Proxy, and 4 angels at Commander Mechanic. The Commander Mechanic and Proxy die, and Neo Royale then plays a Skull Clamp after combat. He then passes, but unfortunately realizes that he's now the Monarch, and given that he has no cards in library, loses when he tries to draw, which has Mr. B winning the game. Game review time! This was a long one. It was about 1 hour and 45 minutes, and I think a lot of it was just slow because we were like slowly milling cards one by one. There were a couple hiccups with turn order, as you may or may not have seen early on, but that was thankfully quickly fixed. I was actually upstairs making hamburgers for everybody when we were filming, and yeah, it just got away from us. Stella Lee, this is not a segue, but Stella Lee was actually an unchanged Precon, and I don't know. I think I missed that set in terms of how playable their decks were. I know I previewed the Naya one, but I don't really think I saw much of any of that set outside of Bristly Bill. And yeah, Stella Lee's really cool. The deck worked really well. Cursed Mirror as a copy of Mindskinner was hilarious. And Chris having filled up Proxy's graveyard meant that his carriage had so many spells in the graveyard to like pump itself from, which was really, really cool to see. In hindsight though, I think Neo probably was in a position to win had he spent like a little bit more time realizing that he needed to have 2 cards as opposed to just the 1 to not deck out when he drew for turn. But he was a good sport about it. He didn't want to wheel it back because he felt that that would change the aspects and how he swung, and we just kind of rolled with it. I mean, ultimately it's up to you to decide if you think it's fair that he won or lost. Go for it in the comments. But Mr. B was really happy that his Queen Marchesa deck got to win regardless. I thought it was pretty well. I like the night theme that seems to be moving throughout it, and cards like Vault of the Archangel and the Blade Historian having Double Strike, Death Touch, and Lifelink meant his attacking creatures were just, ooh, you do not want to block, but you have to block kind of thing. I love that. I also love the Mindskinner. I keep talking about this. Chris's deck was a budget one. I thought that was so good for like only 50 USD, I think maybe even 45. So like the sky feels like it's the limit with this deck. You can put in like Brutovic, which all of a sudden means that that 10 that you get just from swing with your commander initially becomes 20, which really speeds things up. And yeah, I think I might actually build a non-budget version of this, and probably Marvin too in the future. This video wouldn't be possible without the help from my sponsors, but it definitely wouldn't be possible without the help from you, the viewers, and my patrons. So I just want to say thank you for watching, and to remember, friends are just opponents you haven't eliminated yet.